In this lesson, we'll do a brief sort of a history of life on Earth, highlighting the two endosymbiosis events and their significance. Well, it all begins a long time ago, some 4 billion years ago, with chemical evolution. Now that process, chemical evolution, refers to how chemistry at some region on the Earth was producing really important organic molecules, the molecules that make up cells, and that cells assembled from these chemicals that were being produced. So chemical evolution, possibly in small chambers within hydrothermal vents, produces a membrane-bound metabolic engine with the capacity for reproduction using DNA as a hereditary molecule. Now that's a mouthful, but it just means the first cells emerged from chemistry. So we call this chemical evolution produced the first living things, cells. Now these are bacteria type cells, and they go on to evolve into lots of different kinds of bacteria because cells can reproduce, but when they reproduce sometimes there are mutations, changes to the DNA, which means the recipes for proteins are being changed, so new proteins are being produced over time and cells will have new characteristics. So we get the evolution of many different kinds of bacteria on the early Earth. Now here comes the first really important endosymbiosis event. A large bacteria incorporates a smaller bacteria, the ancestor of mitochondria, breaking the energy barrier, the evolution of larger size and greater complexity now possible. Very important process here. Were it not for this endosymbiosis event, there would be no large complex living things on Earth. It'd be all bacteria types of cells. So with the incorporation of this cell into the larger cell, and the cell continues to produce energy and it can reproduce, now this cell has the potential to grow larger in size and get more complex, and in fact evolve into cells that have more active lifestyles, like hunting cells. What's the evidence for this endosymbiosis event? Here we have the mitochondria, the size of bacteria, DNA like bacteria, reproduce like bacteria. Now, once a more energetic and larger and energetic cell evolved, it turns out there were several other endosymbiosis events, but here we'll focus on this one here, which involved the incorporation of a photosynthetic bacteria, like today's cyanobacteria. That bacteria got incorporated, it did not get digested, and this would be the ancestor of chloroplasts. So we have the origin of mitochondria, the origin of chloroplasts, and then some of these cells are going to go on to evolve into multicelled organisms like plants, and some will stay single-celled. Again, what's the evidence for this endosymbiosis event? Chloroplasts are the size of bacteria, DNA like bacteria, reproduce like bacteria. Now, the energetic cells here, the larger energetic cells, were able to then form multicelled organisms. And this happened many times actually in the history of life on Earth, suggesting it was fairly easy to do. Some mutations, some changes allowed cells to stick together, forming a larger colony, and presumably that had advantages to survival. If you're bigger, you can't be eaten by a single-celled predator, right? So now we have the origin of multicelled organisms, but again, they would be impossible were it not for that first endosymbiosis event that allowed for the breaking of the energy barrier. Now cells could get big and complex, and that made multicelled life possible in the future. So together, it's an incredible story. In the 4 billion years of the history of life on Earth, starting from simple bacteria cells, we get a major event that led to the origin of complex cells, and this ancestor here was really successful. All the living things on Earth that are more complex than bacteria can trace their ancestry back to that first endosymbiosis event.